Good afternoon and welcome, Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. We're happy to have you here this afternoon for a very special occasion, the first of three that will relate to the presidential election that is ongoing as we sit here and listen to our speaker this afternoon. Can't hear?
Yeah.
Hold it right up to your mouth.
I get so excited about programs like this that the microphone doesn't stay where it's supposed to stay. Having Bob Strong here this afternoon and twice more is a very special treat, and I'm delighted we were able to put this together. Bob got his PhD from the University of Virginia in 1980. He came to teach at Washington and Lee, teach politics in 1989. His specialty and major interest is the presidency. In particular, I guess, the foreign policy of presidents, and he's written about that. But he's taught courses in the presidency, impeachment, the election of 2016, you remember that one? And he's written books on George W.H. Bush and Jimmy Carter. He's recently transitioned from professor of politics to emeritus professor of politics. So he's now in retirement, but he's also has a gig in Charlottesville at the Miller Center, where he's a senior fellow. Today's lecture is going to deal with, is called the summer surprises. We've had some of those already in the presidential election. We are, I think, 3 weeks, not quite 4 weeks, from President Biden's announcement of his withdrawal from the race. He'll be back here, Bob will, on October 16 for a second lecture about 3 weeks before the election, and that one's called the Fall Forecast. And finally, the week after the election, 8 days after, he'll be here for a post-election summary, and that is one that we hope by then all the votes will have been counted. And that's called What It Might Mean. I've audited all the courses that I mentioned that Bob specified that he taught. He's an excellent professor. You will love him. Please join me in welcoming him today.
Harden, thank you very much for that introduction and for the invitation to come today and in the subsequent sessions. Let me start off by lowering expectations. As Harden mentioned, as I worked as a researcher and writer, I mostly dealt with presidents once they were in office. What did they do in terms of foreign policy decisions? Not an expert on polling, I'm not an expert on campaigning. I pay attention to elections, but probably not much more than you do. And there are real limits to how far beyond what you already know I'll be able to take you in these discussions. As Harden did mention, I had a routine of offering a course in the fall of a presidential election year on the topic of that year's election. That began in 1996 when I co-taught that course with the distinguished Washington Lee graduate Roger Mudd. He gave most of the lectures, I did all the grading. It was an excellent course. It was a really good course. And then again, to lower expectations and tell you how limited my abilities to inform you about an election might be, I have to tell you a sad story about 2000, Gore versus Bush. I was teaching my fall course on the election as it was going on. And I went to the dean and said, can I have some extra money? I want to have an election watch party in our biggest auditorium classroom, and I want to buy pizza for the students. And he said, sure. And then I put signs all across campus that said, come to our event, free pizza until we have a new president. Weeks later, students were knocking on my door. Where's my slice? What's going on? So, this whole business of paying attention to campaigns and predicting is really very hard, even for the experts. When I was in graduate school and studying political science, my grandmother, who had come to this country from Germany, always wanted to know who's going to win the presidential election. And I would explain to her, well, I don't know, no one knows. And she said, well, this is really important to me because I want to vote for the winner. And I tried to explain to her that's not exactly the way it works. You should vote for the one you think will be best. And she said, well, the winner will be best. Let's keep our expectations low. But let me start a conversation with some of the obvious things we say about elections. Early in the summer, it looked like it was going to be a rematch. It was going to be Trump versus Biden. We hadn't done that since 1956. That's a long time ago. And there's not much by way of example or comparison we could make. The two parties were happy with their nominees. The American public was happy with their nominees. Donald Trump never had a presidential approval rating that went over 50%. Eisenhower never had one that went below 50%. A very different time, very different set of circumstances. The one point that you could look back on that reflects somewhat our own circumstance was concern about Eisenhower's health. He had had a heart attack. Was he in danger of having more health problems in a second term? But even then, it didn't compare to the broad public concern about Biden's age and competence. And 1956 wasn't really a replica of what we had set up for ourselves early in the summer. To find two presidents facing off in a rematch, you have to go back to 1892, an even longer time. And again, I'm not sure it's one that offers points of comparison that are important. They were talking about tariffs in 1892. We're always talking about tariffs in one fashion or another. Cleveland was somewhat controversial for marrying a younger woman. His wife was 28 years younger than he was. I think Melania's only 24 years younger than Trump. We were headed toward an unusual election, an election which both of the candidates had a record in the White House. Both of the candidates were, in some sense, incumbents and not new to the office they were seeking. And then it was clear that we weren't going to learn much or get much help from the ordinary presidential selection calendar. There were primaries. There was no real opposition to Biden. And the opposition to Trump never took off. He didn't even bother to go to their presidential debates. It was true that towards the end of the primary season, Nikki Haley was consistently getting roughly 20% of the primary voters. She sometimes got close to that number after she had withdrawn her candidacy. That's an indication of something significant. A significant number of Republican primary voters wanted to cast a vote against Donald Trump. But of course, the bigger lesson from the spring and early summer is that the American people as a whole was dissatisfied with the choice we were facing. A large majority of Americans said, I want something else in this presidential season, and I'm disappointed that the parties, the primaries, are giving us the same two people we looked at 4 years ago. And there was a lot of commentary that maybe 2024 would be a low turnout election. 2020 was our largest turnout election. 66% of eligible voters cast votes in 2020. That's the highest in modern experience. Lots of brand new voters showed up to vote for Donald Trump. Lots of brand new voters showed up to vote against Donald Trump. And it was an election that was harder to predict because so many of the participants were voting for the first time or for the first time in a long time in their voting careers. Of course, all of that has changed. The first of the remarkable events of the summer was Biden's disastrous performance in the June presidential debate. What's the worst presidential performance at a podium in modern experience? Maybe Trump at Helsinki. My intelligence community says the Russians cheated. Putin says he didn't. I'm with Putin. That was a really bad press conference. Or maybe it was, maybe it was Trump and his discussion about disinfectants and whether or not we can get them in our bodies and cure COVID. Some people would say it was Bill Clinton wagging his finger. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Monica Lewinsky. But all of those mistakes, or all of those performances at a podium, involved candidates who were performing at a higher level and were more aware of what they were saying and what they were doing than was Biden. And of course, that surprise was followed quickly by an assassination attempt against Donald Trump. It is regrettable to say that assassination attempts against presidential candidates are not that uncommon in our experience. The Kennedy assassination, shooting George Wallace, attempts on Teddy Roosevelt, attempts on Franklin Roosevelt. We see that far too often. And the combination of the lucky recovery, or the lucky miss that Trump encountered, the dramatic and defiant raising of the fist that he was able to do in the aftermath, the coming together of a country. None of us want to see assassination attempts, and the poor performance of Biden had taken a race that was reasonably close. Trump was ahead early in the summer, but not dramatically ahead. It took a race and changed almost everyone's estimate. The race is now Trump's to lose. And then, more changes. The decision by Biden to step down is a really remarkable one. Presidents don't like to surrender power. They don't like to forego a chance to run for another term. And they almost never do it in the kind of voluntary way that Biden did. I suppose Lyndon Johnson, 1968, is the closest of the recent analogies. He was challenged in the primaries. He probably could have won renomination. He might have been a more effective candidate against Nixon than his vice president. But Johnson also had health issues. His wife was urging him not to run again, not the advice Biden got. And Johnson saw an opportunity, if he was not running for re-election, to perhaps move a peace agreement with the North Vietnamese and alter his legacy. It's really hard to find people like Biden who surrender power. Some people went all the way back to George Washington, who famously surrenders power, both after the Revolutionary War and after 2 terms in the White House. But that's different. That's surrendering power at the peak of your popularity, at the peak of your success, and a very different circumstance. I'm not sure Biden's decision to withdraw was all that much of a surprise. The bigger surprise we've seen in the last few weeks, I think, has been the success of Kamala Harris, who quickly consolidated support within the Democratic Party, who showed herself to be a more effective campaigner than we had seen when she ran in 2019 and early in 2020, and showed herself to be different than what we had thought of her performance as vice president. This has been a real surprise. Whether it's temporary and whether it can be sustained at its current level absolutely remains to be seen. And then she surprised us with her vice presidential choice. A Midwest governor, not a big surprise, but most people thought it would be the governor of Pennsylvania, the central state, not the governor of a state more likely to vote Democratic in 2024. But since she made that choice, people have come around, and Walz has turned out to be a more attractive campaigner than many people, at least on the national stage, thought he would be, and everything has turned around. Harris has gained in the polls. These are the Friday results from the latest New York Times polling with Siena College. And the last time they did this poll, Biden was behind Trump in all 3 of the key states across the Great Lakes arc. Behind in Michigan, behind in Pennsylvania, and behind in Wisconsin. Now, Kamala Harris is ahead. Now, she's ahead within the margin of error. And we all have to look at that with some skepticism about how long it will be sustained. And of course, she had an advantage in this last round of polls for being new and being exciting and more likely to do well in initial polling. But it has changed things dramatically. Those Midwest states look to be more likely than they were a month ago to be close races where the Democrats stand a chance. Moreover, other states that had looked to be out of reach under Biden, Arizona, Georgia, Nevada, are back in play. And it's quite possible that Kamala Harris will be an even stronger candidate in those states than she will be in the Midwest. She's getting big crowds. This really bothers Donald Trump. She's generating the measures of political enthusiasm, money, volunteers, people showing up for her public events that bode well for the weeks ahead. So, there we go. Some of the things we need to watch as this brand new campaign begins to develop. At the end of the day, is this going to be a presidential election cycle where the most important thing will be issues? The economy, the border, abortion rights, the things that the public puts high on their list of things they care about? Or will it be one of those campaigns where issues matter less than the character of the candidates? Both character of candidates and policy arises in every presidential election cycle. But you can think of many in your own experience that fall one way or the other. And the conventional wisdom we're all hearing now is that if the election settles down and becomes a matter of issues, Republicans stand a very good chance. They stand a chance because many Americans are upset about the state of the economy. Inflation numbers are getting better, but the aftermath of having lived with ramped up inflation, higher food prices, higher housing prices, more disruption to family budgets is still with many, many people. And if you ask Americans what's the most important issue in this cycle, the economy, the most common answer in most election cycles, is the one that's likely to arise. And throughout this election cycle, if you asked prospective voters which party is better at dealing with the economy, the answer you would get was the Republicans. There's one poll that came out last week in which voters said, well, I think Harris might be better than Trump in dealing with the economy, but that might be an outlier, and that might not prove to be the case. If it's an issue campaign, there are good issues for both sides. People are very committed to the positions they hold on a question like abortion. People are very concerned about what's happening at the border and what needs to be done. If this turns out not to be an issue campaign, if as the economy gets better, there's less concern about it, if the policies that Biden has recently put in place slow border crossings, which they have thus far done, and that diminishes, and if this becomes a character campaign, that doesn't bode well for Donald Trump. The majority of Americans don't like him. Even the Americans who vote for him don't like him. Many do. But he has a style, he has a way of presenting himself, he has a flamboyance, he has many, many issues and problems that make him a harder sell to a majority of Americans. Not a hard sell to his MAGA base, but a hard sell to a majority of Americans. If it's a character campaign, it will perhaps be closer. But let's be honest, if it's a character campaign, it will also get uglier. And is that what we are in for in the weeks that remain? Again, I don't know the answer to that. You may have a feeling or some response to whether or not that's the thing we should be paying attention to. And then there's the perennial question. If we are having an issue campaign, is it mostly going to be economics, bread and butter, domestic politics? Or are we going to have a campaign where something happens around the world and we suddenly have a foreign policy election? Those are more rare, but they can easily occur. You don't have to think very hard about what could happen in the Middle East, or what could happen in Eastern Europe, or what could happen if we were the target of another large-scale terrorist attack, which is always a possibility. We have not seen a large terrorist attack since 9/11, but there are plenty of groups in the world who could return that to the fore. Will we, in the weeks ahead, encounter some event that's going to flip those concerns and put us more in that national security realm? And then finally, there's one other issue that I'm particularly concerned about. What if we have another really close election? 2020 was not close in the popular vote, but it was close in battleground states. And there were claims about the election. There were fights about the election, and there was, of course, January 6th. Are we going to see all of those things again? And I am impressed by the launch of Kamala Harris's campaign. I'm surprised at the rapid shift in polling numbers. I'm not confident that she is going to sail to an easy and large victory. I'm more likely to think that we are on our way to another close election, and a close election in which we could be in real trouble. And that's where I want to stop and shift gears for just a minute. I've been talking about the 2020 election cycle as if it were normal. Oh, what can we learn from 1956? Did something happen in 1892 we should pay attention to? What do the polls tell us? What are the major issues? How are things developing in the horse race that is our traditional way of thinking about presidential politics? What if nothing is normal? And I mean nothing is normal largely because of Donald Trump. He's a convicted felon with multiple indictments. Some of those indictments involve what he did in connection with the 2020 presidential campaign in Georgia and in the events around January 6th. He falsely claims that he won in 2020. And large numbers of Americans, I'll show you in a moment the numbers, believe that he won in 2020. And the believers are more surprising to me than the Trump false statements. And overthrow the official 2020 election results. That doesn't mean he'll be found guilty in the subsequent trials that might take place. It doesn't mean he will go to jail. But it means we as citizens could easily reach the judgment that he unleashed a mob on the Capitol, or he at least appreciated what the mob was doing on Capitol Hill. We know that he asked his vice president to do things that Mike Pence said were illegal and unconstitutional. We know that when the crowd began chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," Trump sat in his office and did nothing. This isn't normal. This is political behavior that I think we haven't yet fully come to terms with. And I want to spend at least a few minutes pushing back against the big lie. I have relatives who believe it. They are intelligent people. They are nice people. But they believe that there's wide-scale corruption in American presidential voting. I seek out people who hold those beliefs. I'd love to talk to them. Why do you think so? And I get surprising comments from them, and I learn more from them than I learn from people who agree with me. I really want to know why a majority of Republicans believe that the 2020 election was stolen. But for a few minutes, I want to push back against the big lie. And here's where I want to start. Maduro in Venezuela. He lost, didn't he? He claimed victory, but the world community has said he was not elected. It was a corrupt election. How in the world is the world community able to do that? Well, the answer is really simple. Election watchers go to Venezuela and do exit polls. They ask people coming out of voting locations, who did you vote for? Exit polls are like all polls. They're not precisely accurate. They have a margin of error. But in the case of the voting in Venezuela, the exit polls tell us that Maduro got 30% of the vote and his principal opponent got 60%. Okay, I think Maduro lost. This habit of doing exit polls abroad started in the 1980s. Started in 1986 when an American team of election observers, led by the senator I used to work for in Washington, Richard Lugar, went to the Philippines and observed an election by Ferdinand Marcos. They went to the Philippines and they set up an exit poll. They hired people to interview folks as they came out of the voting locations. They hired priests. They thought maybe people won't lie to the priest. But Lugar said that's not what was important. And that's not what was different about the 1980s. What was different is that we gave all the priests a cell phone. At that time, cell phones were about the size of a brick, and they had this long aluminum antenna that you'd have to pull out, and they were very expensive. But we gave them all cell phones so that they could tell us in real time what was happening. And Lugar and the rest of the team observing the election sat in Manila, received the exit poll reports, entered them into laptop computers with models of voting in the Philippines, and quickly determined that Marcos had been defeated decisively by his opponent, the widow of someone he had assassinated. What Lugar said was crucial is that when Marcos announced, "I won," and when Ronald Reagan then called him a few minutes later to congratulate him for winning, Lugar and the other prominent people in the American team could go stand in front of an array of microphones and tell the world, "Mr. President, I'm sorry, but Ferdinand Marcos did not win this election. He lost." And they were able to do that on the basis of polls that can't tell you who won in a close election, but they can tell you whether or not there's a landslide. So, what did the exit polls tell us about 2020? First of all, Biden won decisively in the popular vote. He won by 7 million votes. And he won 51% of the popular vote to Trump's roughly 47. Trump has claimed ever since that not only did he win, but he won by a landslide. Clever people I talk to who want to say the election was rigged say, "Oh, no, that's not true. There weren't millions of illegal votes. That couldn't possibly happen. But there might have been 12,000 in Georgia, there might have been 10,000 in Arizona, there might have been 20,000 in Wisconsin. You should look into that. Those margins are far closer, and it's conceivable that election fraud on that scale might have happened. Whenever someone tells me that, I thank them and say, "Welcome to my side, because you agree with me that Donald Trump is a liar. You agree with me that he didn't win by a landslide. And by the way, you should never tell him that he didn't win by a landslide, because he will cut you off at the knees, right? You have to take his position and his position entirely. You can't modify it and remain in his camp. He says there were millions of illegal votes cast in 2020. How is it possible that people believe that? Well, the Trump campaign didn't trust the exit polls paid for by fake news organizations, right? In every election, the exit polls we hear about are the ones that the major networks, the major newspapers cooperate in conducting. Exit polls are expensive. Trump didn't trust that. Fine. He spent millions of dollars on his own exit polling, particularly in the battleground states. And what did the exit polling say? It said Biden won. Prominent posters who Trump often complimented. Rasmussen, the polling organization that does a lot of work for Republican candidates and tends to lean Republican in their predictions. Many posters lean Democrat in their predictions. When Rasmussen makes a mistake, it's usually on the other side. Rasmussen, on the day of the election, said Biden's going to win 51% of the vote. Trump could win the presidency, but only if he runs the table in the close battleground states, and the odds that he can do that are remote. Rasmussen was right. Trump's posters were right about the result. Trump's own Attorney General famously investigated the claims of voter fraud using the resources of the FBI, using the resources of his network of prosecutors across the country, and the Attorney General reported to the President, "You lost. The claims of voter fraud are nonsense." He used different terminology. He used legal terminology. And Trump's campaign went out and hired election forensic experts. People who can find evidence of election fraud, and again, paid them a substantial amount of money, gave them access to all the information the campaign had, and all the information that Republicans across the country had, and they came back and told Trump there's no evidence of widespread voter fraud. And now I want to be unfair. Sidney Powell, one of Trump's attorneys, went on Fox News and said the election was rigged by Dominion voting machines. They flipped votes. In the course of the trial, the suit brought by Dominion voting machines against Fox News, there was a huge period of discovery. They got all kinds of documents. They got testimony from all kinds of witnesses. And the first time Sidney Powell said, I want to be on Fox News and I want to say that Dominion is responsible for stealing this election, the producers at Fox News did what you're supposed to do. Well, Ms. Powell, what evidence do you have that Dominion has rigged the election? And she delivered to them one piece of evidence. It was an email she had received from a person she did not know, who said the election was stolen by Dominion, and I know this because I have the ability to see things other people can't see and to hear things other people can't hear. The wind speaks to me, and the wind told me that Dominion had stolen the election. And I know this sounds fantastic, she says in her email, and I know you won't believe me, but you should know that I have died twice. Once in a traffic accident, and once when the FBI shot me in the back. And both times, I instantly came back to life and was unharmed. I have miraculous power, and on the basis of that, you should know that Dominion stole the election. The producers at Fox News referred to this as the wackadoodle email. And they actually had an argument. Should we put Sidney Powell on the air? And they did. And she made her false claims about Dominion. This went on for several weeks. And Dominion sued for defamation. Fox News is a very powerful company. Fox News is a very rich company. They can hire the best attorneys money can buy. They did. And what did the best attorneys money can buy say to Fox News? Don't go to trial. You're going to lose. The evidence against you is overwhelming. You recklessly broadcast information that you knew not to be true. You need to pay. And they paid $750 million. $750 million to Dominion. Dominion used to be in the business of making voting machines. They are now in the business of suing people. And it's a very good business. It's a very good business. They're not finished. There are many more suits that remain. Now, this is an unfair example to give you. It's insane. It's crazy. It is, in fact, documented in the discovery process that was released to the public because of the Dominion trial. There are issues about our election process. There are things that can be said to criticize our current registration rosters. There are procedures, and it varies from state to state, sometimes from county to county. We don't run perfect elections. But that's not what was talked about in 2020. What was talked about was a false claim that Donald Trump won a landslide, and a large number of Americans who believe him. More than 50% of the Republican Party. 5% of the Democratic Party think the election may have been rigged. We are entering this election cycle with the legacy of this level of distrust for our election procedures. It's not going to serve us well. So a couple of final questions, and then I really want to hear your comments, your take on what we are seeing. Will there be a 2024 big lie? Oh, yes. Now, if Trump wins, there won't be, right? If Trump wins, then the election was proper. Everything is in order. He may quibble. I won this or that state that has been officially declared for Harris, and we'll look into that once I get into the White House. But there won't be a serious challenge to the election result if Trump wins, and he could. In which case, we're not going to have a problem with our election system. We're going to have lots of other problems, but we're not going to have that. Will there be more problems in the counting and certifying of election results? Yes, there will be. And the group that worked with Trump in trying to overturn the 2020 election was a lot like Sidney Powell, not terribly competent and not very skilled in collecting evidence, presenting evidence, or challenging election results. The Trump team sued for election issues over 60 times and only won once. They won in Pennsylvania, where in Philadelphia, local election officials wanted to give people a break and count mail-in ballots that arrived a day or two after the deadline that had been set by law. The judge found that that's improper. You can't do that. Okay, they won that case. The number of votes that came in a day or two after were not enough to flip Pennsylvania. They were not ever counted in the official Pennsylvania tally. It was an insignificant victory. And every other case the Trump lawyers brought was lost. And many of the lawyers who brought those cases are being disciplined. You brought false and frivolous issues to our bench. You're not allowed to do that. And they are being sanctioned in a variety of ways. That kind of failed effort to challenge the election is going to be replaced, I think this time around, by a much more well-organized professional effort to challenge election results if Trump loses. And here's the really difficult issue I worry about more than any other. Will there be violence in support of a lie that Trump, having lost, claims victory? I think there will be. Johns Hopkins did a survey just a couple of weeks ago, and they asked voters all across the country, do you think there's going to be violence in 2024? Over on the right-hand side, that light gray, those are people who say, no, there won't be any violence. There aren't many of them. Everybody else thinks that we'll have a little, or a moderate amount, or a lot, or a great deal. I hope that prediction is incorrect, but can't give you much in the way of reassurance that that won't be the case. And this time the violence is going to be better planned, better executed, and far more problematic. All right. And here's the one final thought I want to leave you with. It's been a surprising summer. I don't remember a summer in presidential politics anything like this one. We normally talk about surprises in the presidential election cycle happening in September and October. October surprises. What are they going to be this time? It's a game I play with other presidency watchers, and it's not fun. We're worried about a wide variety of things, and maybe we're over-worried. Maybe we are going to either have such a decisive result this time around that those issues diminish, or maybe when steps are taken that are widely seen by the American public as a step too far, we will come around and hold on to election integrity and democracy. I hope so. And I welcome your questions, your comments. Do we need to pass that microphone around, or do we just call on people?
If they got their hand up, you can call on them.
All right. Yes.
Do you think the issue of third parties recedes in importance under Trump-Harris campaign versus Trump-Biden?
I believe it will. Keep your eye on polling data in the next weeks. When they ask, are you going to vote for Kennedy or are you going to vote for a third party candidate? I think the interest in third party candidates was high because the American public was so dissatisfied with the Trump-Biden choice. And that now that the choice is different and the Democratic side more interesting, those numbers are likely to come down. The trajectory of those numbers in a normal election cycle is to go down anyway. Early in an election, people who are undecided will say, well, I'll vote for Kennedy or I'll vote for one of the third parties. And as the election gets closer, people change their minds and pick one of the two principal candidates. Yes?
I've been interested in when Hillary was running, it was such a big deal that she was a woman running for president, and we had never had that. A lot of people were uncomfortable with that. I haven't heard a single word to that effect about Kamala Harris.
Well, of course, she was on a national ticket. She was elected vice president of the United States. That's different. Time has passed since 2016. I agree with your observation. There is less attention to the possibility that she would be the first woman to be president of the United States than there was in 2016. As the election season gets nastier, are there going to be more gender-based, more race-based attacks on Harris? Almost certainly. But there are more women voters than male voters, and there could easily be a broad gender gap in this election cycle. Yes, sir.
Follow-up question on that. There always has been, for the last 40 years, there's been that gender gap. I mean, there was a time in which males and females were pretty close in terms of their voting pattern. That has separated over the last 40 years. Right now, yes, we expect that there'll be more women voting Democratic than ever before. How about the male vote in terms of, how about what is the vulnerability in terms of the decrease in voting among male candidates, particularly non-college graduates and other people, including minorities?
Well, there's a lot of interesting questions there, and in the commentary, all of us are reading and absorbing. People slice and dice the poll results and slice and dice the election results. And the primary purpose of exit polling is not to find out who won. We don't use it for that purpose. We do in Venezuela and other places. The primary purpose is to find out why did different groups vote different ways. And the commentary before Harris's nomination became the new reality was that Trump is making inroads with Black and Hispanic voters, particularly Black male voters. Not huge inroads, but inroads into what had been an expected Democratic voting bloc that were important. And the commentary was saying Biden's virtue as a candidate in 2020 was that he did better with older white male non-college voters. And that is what helped him enormously. So, are those patterns going to be repeated? By the way, we've been denied intelligent national conversation about the 2020 election. If we were having intelligent national conversation, we would have said, isn't it exciting that so many people voted? Isn't it good that the Republicans are making a stronger appeal to Black and Hispanic voters? Isn't it interesting that the gender mix is shifting? We could have lots of interesting observations about what actually happened in 2020. Most of our national conversation is fantasy. It's about things that didn't happen in 2020, and large numbers of people who believe the things that didn't happen. Yes, watch carefully. And the thing to watch carefully, I believe, is can Kamala Harris hold on to some of those Midwest white voters that Biden attracted? Biden will certainly campaign for her in Scranton and in Pennsylvania, and her vice presidential choice may help her with those voters as well. But those voters tend not to like San Francisco liberals, and if she gets successfully portrayed in that way, she may have a harder time. Yes, sir.
You didn't speak at all about Trump's vice presidential candidate.
I did.
Do you think that there's any weight should be given to the importance of the vice presidential candidates, and if, in general, and in this specific election?
Well, in general, Trump was right the other day when he said mostly vice presidential choices don't matter in presidential elections. That's the consensus among people who study those things. Vice presidents can embarrass you. Sarah Palin became very controversial, did not help John McCain. But mostly, they don't matter a great deal. I think that Trump is going to deeply regret that he chose his vice president at a time when he was ahead and when he was running against a candidate who the American public deemed too old to weakened by age to do the job. Doesn't matter who I pick for vice president, he might have thought. I'll pick the guy my son likes. I'll pick the rising star in Ohio. And I won't have to be strategic about my vice presidential choice. Well, now that's looking like a missed opportunity. I think Vance is a very interesting person. I liked his book, Hillary Elegy. And I wish the guy who I thought I was getting to know when I read that book was running. He's not the same as the person that emerged from that very compelling memoir. So I don't think it's either vice president is going to matter a great deal. More questions? Yes?
What do you think the chances are in the future that the electoral college system will be abolished? And then we'll have direct popular voting?
Yeah. Unlikely. Certainly, if you wanted to remove it from the Constitution, you'd have to amend the Constitution. You'd have to have a huge supermajority among the states that approved the amendment, and in Congress and the passage of it. I was surprised, were you, that there wasn't more complaint about the Electoral College, both in 2000 and in 2016. We have endured lots of elections in which the popular will was not met, and instead this elaborate system intended, well, it had lots of intentions. It intended, at least in part, to ask that the president have two majorities. A majority of support among the people, but also a majority across regions and in states of different sizes and different interests. It's not a bad idea to have complicated majorities. And sometimes the Electoral College has taken a very close and contentious election and made it look more like a significant victory than it was. It has sometimes done good. And it has, in general, made it harder for us to run racist campaigns. In the late 1950s, there was talk about reforming and getting rid of the Electoral College, and there was a proposal in the Senate. John Kennedy spoke against it and said, if we did national voting, then you could run a racist campaign against this or that minority, and it wouldn't hurt you that much. Now, those groups hold the balance in close states, and you can't offend Cubans in Florida and expect to win in Florida, and you can't be as dismissive of small groups as you might be if we just did the national vote. So it's worth thinking whenever you talk about amending the Constitution. It will make some things better, it will probably make some things worse, and you should maybe appreciate that it's hard to change it.
Before we wind things up, let me just cover one point that I didn't cover at the beginning. I carefully wrote down all the things I wanted to say in introducing Bob, but I knew I was apt to forget an important thing if I didn't put it at the top of the list. I put it at the top of the list, and I got hung up on the microphone and wanting to talk about Bob Strong. But what I wanted to tell you, and I'll tell you now, is that the marketing department has prepared a wine reception for us after this is over. And those of you who still have questions of Bob, I hope you'll be here, have some wine, and answer some more questions. One of which might be, did you not have things to fill in all the blank up there? Are you gonna, is that what you're gonna do in October? Okay, well, this has been terrific, a great start. Thank you all for being here.